How does a quiet December morning transform into a scene of terror and disbelief? One moment, Brian Thompson, the CEO of UnitedHealthcare, is stepping into the brisk air, perhaps thinking of his next meeting or a warm cup of coffee. The next, his life is stolen by a single cold-blooded act. The shooter, a young, intelligent scholar named Luigi Mangione, didn't just pull the trigger. He delivered a calculated statement, one that would unravel into a chilling narrative of obsession, betrayal, and unbridled rage. What drives a person to abandon reason and embrace violence? Was this merely a personal vendetta, or the shocking result of a brewing hatred toward an entire industry? The truth lies in a trail of evidence and a manifesto that no one saw coming. The haunting reality is, any of us could have been there, just steps away from an ordinary moment turned deadly. Would you have noticed the danger before it struck, or like so many others, been caught in the ordinary moments leading up to an extraordinary crime? Welcome to True Crime Acts, where we look into the hidden truths behind some of the most chilling real-life events. Our mission is to uncover the stories that shock, educate, and spark change, reminding us that behind every headline is a victim, a family, and a ripple effect felt by an entire community. If you find this journey as important as we do, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the notification bell to ensure you never miss another gripping exploration into the depths of human behavior. New York City wakes up like an orchestra warming up, car horns, distant chatter, the hum of traffic blending into a familiar urban melody. Brian Thompson, CEO of UnitedHealthcare, was just another player in this ensemble, his polished shoes clicking on the pavement as he approached the New York Hilton Midtown. His thoughts likely revolved around the presentation he was scheduled to give that morning. A meeting with stakeholders, a discussion on healthcare innovations, expected safe, but fate had written a different script for Thompson that day. Amid the crowd, a shadow moved with a purpose that only later would be understood. Luigi Mangione, a 26-year-old Ivy League graduate with a brilliant mind and a simmering rage, blended into the chaos. Unlike the hurried commuters, his movements were deliberate. Each step brought him closer to Thompson, closer to the moment he had meticulously planned. In a flash, it happened. A muffled pop, a sound so quiet that most passersby didn't even register it as a gunshot. Thompson's body crumpled to the cold concrete, his briefcase skittering away, papers spilling out like fallen leaves. His expression was frozen in a mixture of shock and confusion, his life extinguished before his mind could process the danger. People screamed. Phones were raised, not to call for help, but to capture the horror on shaky screens. Within minutes, the scene was a flurry of red and blue lights, crime scene tape stretching like a wound across the sidewalk. Mangione had vanished, slipping into the anonymity of the city he had used as a stage for his deadly performance. Authorities rushed to cordon off the area, but the damage was done. A titan of the healthcare industry lay dead, and the man who pulled the trigger had left nothing behind but a question. Why? Could a young man with a promising future really be capable of such a cold and calculated act of murder? And if so, what could drive someone to trade ambition for infamy in the blink of an eye? In the hours following the assassination, New York City buzzed with theories. Was this a targeted hit? A random act of violence? The NYPD mobilized all available resources, scouring the area for clues. Security camera footage from the hotel lobby provided the first break in the case. A grainy image of a man in a dark hoodie, hands hidden in his pockets, walking purposefully towards the entrance. Digital enhancement sharpened the image, and soon the face of Luigi Mangione emerged. To those who knew him, the revelation was like a slap across the face. Mangione wasn't a career criminal or a desperate drifter. He was a scholar, a young man with an Ivy League education and a reputation for brilliance. Born in Maryland, he had excelled academically, earning scholarships and accolades along the way. But beneath the surface, a darker narrative had been brewing. Friends recalled a change in him over the past year. Mangione had become increasingly withdrawn, his conversations shifting from technology and innovation to grievances against the healthcare system. His social media posts evolved from harmless tech musings to scathing critiques of insurance companies. But nobody had seen the warning signs for what they were. A manifesto being built in plain sight. When police raided Mangione's temporary apartment in Altoona, Pennsylvania, they found more than they had expected. Alongside clothes and toiletries were forged IDs, a ghost gun with a 3D printed suppressor, and a notebook filled with names. Brian Thompson's prominently circled in red. His manifesto wasn't just words, it was a hit list. But what transformed this bright young man into a cold-blooded killer? Was this a calculated act of revenge, or had something within him snapped, releasing a monster hidden beneath his quiet demeanor? Investigators pieced together Mangione's timeline, revealing a plot as chilling as it was methodical. It began months earlier with small purchases from obscure websites, 3D printed gun parts, spy cameras, fake IDs. He paid for everything in cryptocurrency, leaving no traditional financial trail. His travel history showed a pattern of moving between budget motels and Airbnbs, never staying too long in one place, always paying in cash. His manifesto, which investigators found scrawled in a worn notebook, painted a disturbing picture. It wasn't just a rant against healthcare, it was a call to arms. Mangione wrote about the crimes of insurance companies, accusing them of putting profits over people's lives. He believed they were responsible for the deaths of those who couldn't afford treatment, that they were murderers hiding behind corporate logos. Brian Thompson, as the CEO of one of the largest healthcare insurers, became the symbol of everything Mangione hated. The manifesto also included chilling details about how to avoid detection. He had researched law enforcement protocols, studying how long it took for police to respond to incidents in Midtown. He even rehearsed his escape routes, choosing the subway station with the most exits. How could someone so young and intelligent turn into a meticulous planner of murder? And if he could justify killing one man, how far was he willing to go to see his twisted vision of justice realized? The morning of December 4th unfolded like a scene from a movie. Mangione arrived near the New York Hilton Midtown an hour before Thompson's expected departure. He sat at a nearby coffee shop, a paper cup cradled in his hands, his eyes fixed on the hotel entrance. To anyone watching, he was just another commuter, perhaps waiting for a friend or a business associate. But when Thompson finally appeared, Mangione stood. His movements were fluid, his approach casual. The silenced gun in his pocket was barely noticeable, hidden by the drape of his coat. The moment they crossed paths, Mangione's arm lifted, the gun pressed to Thompson's side. The shot was almost soundless, a muted cough in the open air. Thompson's body dropped, his momentum carrying him forward a step before he collapsed. Mangione didn't run. Instead, he blended into the throng of shocked bystanders, his expression mirroring their horror. He walked 2 blocks to a subway station, where he had stashed a change of clothes. In minutes, the manhunt had begun, but Mangione was already gone, slipping through the city like a ghost. How does a man orchestrate such a perfect crime? And if he could escape so easily, how many more were on his list, waiting for their turn to face his silent justice? The killing of Brian Thompson sent shockwaves through the nation. Media outlets scrambled to cover the story, their headlines a blend of outrage and curiosity. How could this happen in broad daylight, in one of the most heavily surveilled cities in the world? Pundits debated Mangione's motives, with some framing him as a terrorist, and others suggesting he might be a tragic figure driven by societal failures. Public opinion was divided. On one hand, Thompson was a respected business leader, a man whose work impacted millions of lives. But the healthcare industry was not without its critics. As details of Mangione's manifesto leaked, social media erupted. Some voices, though few, expressed understanding of his rage, arguing that the healthcare system did push people to the brink. As Mangione remained at large, fear spread. Executives in the insurance and pharmaceutical industries heightened their security. Police patrols increased, and the NYPD released a public safety bulletin urging vigilance. The city was on edge, a community holding its breath, wondering if the next attack was just a heartbeat away. Was Mangione a lone wolf, or had his actions lit a fuse that others might follow? And as the world watched, would the story end with justice, or with another chilling chapter of violence? New York City transformed overnight into a fortress on high alert. The NYPD mobilized its largest manhunt in recent history, enlisting the help of the FBI and state law enforcement. Highways displayed digital billboards with Mangione's face, his cold eyes staring down at drivers as they sped through toll booths and under overpasses. The message was clear. This man was armed, dangerous, and somewhere among them, investigators scoured Mangione's digital footprint. His phone had been disabled, his bank accounts drained of funds. It became evident that this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment attack, but a meticulously planned execution. Surveillance footage from Pennsylvania showed Mangione purchasing bus tickets and withdrawing cash from ATMs, always with his face obscured by a baseball cap or hoodie. He moved with a precision that suggested he had studied how to avoid detection. Police knocked on doors, questioned acquaintances, and monitored known safe houses. Tips poured in from across the city. Mangione had been spotted on the subway, at a diner, in a library. Each lead took investigators on a chase through the city's labyrinthine streets. But every time they arrived, Mangione was already gone, a ghost slipping through their fingers. Despite the overwhelming force against him, Mangione maintained his freedom. It seemed that he had anticipated every move, a chess master who had already seen 10 moves ahead. But with the nation watching, law enforcement knew they couldn't afford a mistake. The pressure mounted, each day without an arrest tightening the grip of fear on the city. Would the hunter become the hunted? And if Mangione was always one step ahead, what could possibly draw him out of the shadows and into the hands of justice? For weeks, Mangione eluded capture. He lived in the margins, relying on cash-only transactions and temporary housing that required no identification. But his downfall came not from a dramatic confrontation, but a small, almost mundane mistake. An email. Mangione had been using encrypted messaging apps to maintain contact with an underground network of anti-corporate activists. These were people who shared his disdain for the healthcare industry, though none had demonstrated his capacity for violence. Mangione's goal was to secure safe passage out of the country. He needed fake documents, a new identity, and a way to disappear permanently. However, while logging into a public Wi-Fi network, Mangione inadvertently connected to an unsecured hotspot. This small digital footprint was all investigators needed. They triangulated his location to a rundown motel on the edge of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. A SWAT team was mobilized, their armored vehicles rumbling through the early morning mist. The takedown was swift. Officers breached the door, finding Mangione sitting calmly on the edge of the bed, his hands resting on his knees. His gun lay on the nightstand, within reach but untouched. He offered no resistance, his only words, "It had to be done." What pushed a man who had meticulously orchestrated every step to suddenly surrender without a fight? Was it resignation, a final act of control, or did Mangione believe his message had already been heard loud and clear? The trial of Luigi Mangione gripped the nation. Prosecutors painted him as a domestic terrorist, a man who had transformed his anger into a deadly weapon. They presented evidence of his manifesto, the ghost gun, and the chillingly detailed plan he had drafted. Witnesses testified about Mangione's increasingly erratic behavior, his obsessive rants about corporate greed, and the venom he directed at the healthcare industry. Mangione's defense, however, was equally compelling. His lawyers argued that he was not a terrorist, but a disillusioned young man who had lost faith in the system. They introduced testimony from mental health experts who described how a series of personal losses, medical bills from a family illness, a rejected insurance claim that led to a loved one's death, had fractured his psyche. Mangione himself took the stand, delivering a haunting monologue about corporate corruption, about lives lost to greed, and about how he saw Thompson as a symbol, not a person. The jury deliberated for days. When the verdict was read, guilty of murder as an act of terrorism, there was no audible reaction from Mangione. He stood still, his expression unchanged, as though he had always known this was how his story would end. Did Mangione achieve the martyrdom he sought, or had his actions only deepened the divide between righteous anger and cold-blooded murder? Sentencing Mangione proved to be as contentious as the trial itself. The prosecution pushed for the maximum penalty under New York's terrorism statutes, life without parole. The federal government weighed in, considering charges that could lead to the death penalty, arguing that Mangione's act was not just a murder, but an assault on the nation's stability. Ultimately, the judge delivered a life sentence. Mangione would spend the rest of his days in a maximum security prison, isolated from the world he had sought to change. His manifesto, once a digital whisper among a niche group of activists, became a dark legend. It circulated online, attracting a small but vocal group of followers who saw him as a hero. This digital echo worried authorities, who monitored forums and chat rooms for signs of emerging threats. The healthcare industry also faced fallout. Protests erupted, and corporate executives received increased security. The conversation about insurance practices, fairness in healthcare, and the desperation that can lead to violence intensified. Mangione's story became a case study in how personal grievances, when left unchecked, can ignite into national tragedies. Would Mangione's imprisonment silence his message, or had he sparked a fire that would continue to burn, fueling others with the same sense of injustice? Years after the assassination of Brian Thompson, the legacy of Luigi Mangione remains complicated. For Thompson's family, the grief is an unhealed wound. His widow spoke at conferences, advocating for stronger protections against targeted violence and emphasizing the human cost of hatred. His children grew up under the shadow of their father's death, his absence a constant reminder of the day their lives were shattered. For Mangione's followers, however, his story took on a different hue. They argued that while his actions were unforgivable, his grievances against the healthcare industry were not. His name appeared on placards during protests, his manifesto quoted in debates about healthcare reform. The FBI monitored these movements closely, wary of lone wolves who might seek to emulate Mangione's path. Legislative changes did come, though not directly because of Mangione's actions. Insurance reforms tightened loopholes, and discussions about mental health support for those struggling with financial and medical hardships gained traction. It was a bitter irony that the issues Mangione had wanted to address became national talking points, but only through the lens of his crime. Would his story remain a cautionary tale of how anger can consume a person? Or would history remember him as a tragic figure whose warning signs were missed until it was too late? As the echoes of this harrowing story fade, the questions it leaves behind only grow louder. Brian Thompson's murder wasn't just a headline. It was a stark reminder of how fragile safety can be, even for those who seem untouchable. The life of a prominent CEO, a man who dedicated his career to the complexities of healthcare, was stolen in a flash of violence. Yet beneath this act lay years of simmering rage, a disillusioned mind, and a manifesto that still stirs whispers online. Luigi Mangione may be behind bars, but the impact of his crime reverberates through boardrooms, communities, and the hearts of those who continue to mourn Thompson's loss. His actions serve as a somber testament to how unchecked grievances, when left to fester, can turn deadly. It also forces us to confront uncomfortable truths. How do we balance corporate responsibility with individual despair? What signs did society miss in Mangione's descent into extremism? And, perhaps most unsettling, could this happen again? As we close this chapter, let this story not only evoke sorrow but also inspire vigilance. If you or someone you know is struggling with feelings of anger, disillusionment, or isolation, speak up. Reach out. Sometimes the smallest gesture of support can redirect a path from tragedy to healing. For more stories that dig into the shadows, exposing the hidden dangers in our everyday lives, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Click the notification bell to stay informed as we continue unraveling the threads of true crime, showing how real life often holds more chilling tales than fiction. What are your thoughts on this case? Do you believe more could have been done to prevent it? Or was it a tragedy bound to unfold? Share your perspective in the comments below, because every voice matters in the pursuit of understanding and change.